Brilliant course at the Tavistock, which is, a world famous place in Hampstead for postgraduate learning, and it's called Consultation in the Organisation: Psychoanalytic Approaches. Bit of a complicated title, but in plain English it's about group dynamics in the workplace, but looking at this from quite a kind of deep psychoanalytic perspective. And it's really fascinating. There's quite a bit of theory. People always say, oh, you must be doing Freud, but it's not actually Freud. It's very heavily based on Melanie Klein, also a chap called Wilfred Bion, and then there's several others. Eric Miller's a particular guru that we read papers about. But it's quite a lot of papers from the kind of 1950s and 60s, and we look at case studies as well. What's really interesting about the course is that we're looking at what's going on in a group but below the surface, and I think what we're really trying to get at is the group unconscious. Sounds a bit kind of pretentious. I mean, it's difficult enough to figure out what the kind of individual unconscious is, never mind the group unconscious. And I struggle to put this into words really. The unconscious is basically stuff that you don't know about, and if you follow the kind of Freudian thing, it's to do with repression and stuff that is kind of painful and therefore you don't want to think about. And I guess what we're trying to do is we're trying to look at kind of surfacing some of this repressed stuff. Now, I do have problems with it because, of course, the reason that it's repressed and unconscious, well, there probably are reasons for that. So kind of A, is it going to be explosive when it comes to the surface? And B, how do you know that you've got it to the surface? Because if it's repressed, how do you know that it's kind of come up in the right way? So it's really hard to talk about, but we can look at these unconscious, repressed, unthought things by seeing what's avoided and what's missing. And a lot of the time we're looking at what's left unsaid. We're looking at kind of gaps and things that aren't spoken but perhaps would be helpful if they were spoken. Right, well, how this applies to qualitative research, I've been thinking about this and I'm not sure I've got the answer. But I do think there are links. I think qualitative people are curious, they're interested in motivation, and I think kind of, we wouldn't have done well in this sort of work unless we were good at reading between the lines. Psychoanalytic work tends to be rather unstructured. It's a lot to do with what comes to mind and free association. So I've been giving some thought to the way in which conventional group discussions in a kind of commercial sense tend to be very structured. I mean, increasingly clients have got these great long discussion guides, look at all these things, look at this stimulus material, and it can easily get a bit superficial. And I guess what I might like to do in the future, if somebody will pay me to do this, is experiment a bit with not having a script or having a kind of much more fluid script and seeing what comes up as opposed to being rather directive, which I think unfortunately we often are because of the quantity of material that we're asked to go through. And I'm also interested in thinking about what silence means. In psychoanalysis you kind of wait for people to speak, you don't kind of force them to speak. And in group discussions, the way I was trained, you've got 8 participants, you should make sure that 8 people kind of basically each have a go. They have a share of the voice. So 8 people, 8 speaking people. So this would be quite different if you just allowed people to choose whether or not to participate and you didn't actively join them in. I'm not really sure where I'm going with this, but I'm interested to see if others would like to engage in a debate about the use of a psychoanalytic approach. So, thanks for listening.